My husband of 10 years is perfect. Thoughtful, romantic, always seems to know what I'm thinking. I just found the original psychiatric report from before we met. I wasn't his first relationship, I was his obsession, and he spent 2 years studying my life, my habits, and my personality before he accidentally met me. Mark is a symphony of perfect moments. He is the curator of my happiness, the quiet architect of my contentment. For 10 years, our marriage has been a masterpiece of thoughtful gestures and intuitive understanding. He knows, for instance, that I only like coffee in the first hour of the morning, after which I switch to Earl Grey tea. He knows that the third song on a little-known indie album from 2009 can instantly pull me out of a bad mood. He knows this not because I told him, but because he pays attention. He is the most attentive man I have ever known. Our friends marvel at it. They call him a unicorn, a mind reader. When I was passed over for a promotion I desperately wanted, I came home not to a barrage of questions, but to a quiet house, a drawn bath, and a reservation at the one restaurant I had idly bookmarked online a month prior. He said he just had a feeling it was what I needed. His feelings are always right. He is my anchor, my soulmate, the man who knows me better than I know myself. Our love story is a quiet, comfortable epic. Our meet cute is a favorite story to tell at dinner parties. We were in a small, dusty, secondhand bookstore, both reaching for the same worn copy of my favorite obscure novel. Our hands touched, we laughed. He had the most wonderful, sincere eyes I had ever seen. He told me he'd been on a quest to read more female authors and picked that book at random. It felt like fate, a one-in-a-million collision of two souls destined to find each other. Today, I was doing some spring cleaning, a rare burst of domestic energy. I decided to finally tackle the deep storage closet, a dusty archive of things we no longer needed. At the very bottom of a box of his old college textbooks and papers, I found a thick, sealed manila envelope. It looked official, with no return address. My first thought was that it was old financial aid documents, but curiosity got the better of me. I slid it open. Inside was a bound document about 30 pages long. The cover page read, Psychiatric Evaluation, Confidential. Subject, Mark Turner. My breath caught. It was dated 12 years ago, 2 years before we met. My heart pounded with a sudden protective fear. Was there something about his past? Some trauma he had never told me? I felt a pang of guilt for invading his privacy, but an irresistible force compelled me to read on. The first few pages were standard clinical jargon, but then I got to a section titled Presenting Issues and Patient History. I read a paragraph, and the floor of my quiet, perfect home seemed to tilt on its axis. The subject, Mark, presents with a case of pathological obsession and romantic fixation. The object of this fixation is a woman named Sarah Hayes, my maiden name. The obsession began after a brief chance encounter in a university library 2 years prior, an encounter the subject is certain Miss Hayes does not remember. In the intervening 24 months, the subject admits to a period of intense, clandestine surveillance and information gathering. He has compiled a detailed dossier on Miss Hayes' habits, preferences, social circles, and personal history, using a combination of online research and real-world observation. His stated goal is not to harm or harass, but to understand her completely in order to become her perfect partner. The subject sees this period of study as a romantic, epic quest, a necessary preparation before he formally engineers a meeting. The report went on page after horrifying page. It detailed my favorite coffee shops, my weekly running routes, my complicated relationship with my sister, my secret love for that obscure indie band. It was a perfect, clinical, terrifyingly accurate blueprint of my entire life. I dropped the document. The pages fluttered to the floor. My mind flashed back to that dusty bookstore, to the chance meeting that had been the foundation of my entire adult life. He hadn't picked that book at random. He knew it was my favorite. He hadn't been on a quest to read more female authors. He had been on a quest for me. Our meeting wasn't fate. It wasn't a one-in-a-million chance. It was the final exam of a 2-year course of study for which I was the sole subject. He didn't just pay attention, he had cheated. He had read the textbook, memorized the answers, and for 10 years I had been giving him a perfect score. The silence in the house was no longer comforting. It was the sound of a vacuum. My 10-year marriage, a life I had believed to be a beautiful, organic creation, was revealed to be a meticulously constructed artifice. I sank to the floor of the dusty closet, the scattered pages of the report like dead leaves around me. My mind, reeling, began a frantic audit of our entire relationship. Every memory now a potential piece of evidence. The perfect moments, once the shining jewels of our life together, now looked like stones from a graveyard. Our first date, the one he had spontaneously planned, he had taken me to a tiny, hole-in-the-wall Thai restaurant and an obscure French film. I had been amazed, gushing to my friends that I had finally met a man who just got me. He hadn't just gotten me, he had studied me. The report detailed my love for both Thai food and French New Wave cinema, information he had likely gleaned from my old, long-forgotten college blog. Every thoughtful gift, every perfectly timed gesture was now tainted. The rare, out-of-print book he found for our first anniversary, he hadn't stumbled upon it, he had known to look for it. The surprise trip to a remote, windy coastline for my 30th birthday, it wasn't an intuitive guess. It was the execution of a data point, a fulfillment of a wish I had once expressed to a friend over coffee, a conversation he must have overheard. He wasn't a mind reader, he was a spy. The most intimate parts of our life felt the most violated. He knew my fears, my insecurities, my deepest vulnerabilities. I had thought his gentle, unwavering support through my father's illness was a testament to his love. Now I saw it through the chilling lens of the report's clinical language. Subject displays a keen interest in Ms. Hayes' familial relationships, particularly her unresolved grief regarding her father's health. He sees this as a key area where emotional support can be strategically deployed to build trust. He hadn't just been comforting me, he had been executing a strategy. My grief had been an opportunity for him to score points, to deepen his infiltration. Who was this man? The man I loved was a kind, intuitive soulmate. The man in the report was a predator, a methodical, patient hunter who had stalked his prey for 2 years before moving in for the kill. The most terrifying part was that the two men were the same. The kindness was real, the thoughtfulness was real, but it was all built on a foundation of absolute soul-crushing deceit. It was like discovering that the beautiful, sturdy house you have lived in your whole life was built by a serial killer. The house is still real, but you can never see it the same way again. My body was trembling, a physical reaction to the psychological violence of the revelation. This was a violation of a kind I had no name for. It wasn't infidelity. It was a complete and total colonization of my very self. He hadn't just lied to me. He had stolen me, piece by piece, before I even knew his name. I heard the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. My husband, the stranger, was home. I scrambled to gather the scattered pages, my hands shaking so badly I could barely pick them up. I shoved the report back into its envelope and buried it deep in the box, hiding the evidence of his crime, a reflexive, instinctive act of self-preservation. I stumbled out of the closet just as he walked in the front door, his arms full of groceries. He smiled, that warm, familiar, devastating smile. "Hey, you," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I had a feeling you might be craving lasagna tonight, so I grabbed the good ricotta." He had a feeling? The words, once so endearing, were now a slap in the face. I looked at him. At this man who had studied me like an exam, and my mind was a screaming void. He saw the look on my face, the panic and the horror I couldn't hide, and his smile faltered. "Sarah, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I have," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The ghost was him. The ghost was the life I thought I had, and I was standing in a haunted house of his creation. His concern was immediate and suffocating. He put down the groceries, his brow furrowed in that familiar, gentle way. "What is it? Are you hurt? Did something happen?" He moved toward me, his hands outstretched, and I recoiled, taking a sharp, involuntary step back. The action was as loud as a gunshot in the quiet room. His hands dropped to his sides. A look of profound, genuine hurt crossed his face. For a decade, his touch had been my comfort, my safe harbor. Now it felt like the advance of an enemy soldier. "Don't," I said, the word a raw, broken thing. "Don't what?" he asked, his voice laced with confusion that seemed utterly real. "Sarah, you're scaring me. Talk to me." But I couldn't. The truth was a live grenade in my throat. If I pulled the pin, it would destroy everything. The man I had loved, the life we had built, the very woman I believed myself to be. How do you start that conversation? You know that cute story about how we met? It was a lie. Our entire life is a lie. You're not my soulmate. You're a stalker. I needed to get out. I needed air. I needed to be in a place that wasn't a set piece in his decade-long play. "I can't," I whispered, shaking my head. I can't be here right now." I fled. I grabbed my keys in my purse and walked out the front door, leaving him standing in the entryway with a bag of groceries and a look of bewildered pain on his face. The performance was flawless. He was playing the part of the wounded, confused husband to perfection. I didn't know if the performance was for me or if he was so deep in his own fiction that he had become the character, unable to distinguish the role from the self. I drove to the one place in the city that felt truly anonymous, the public library. Not the university library where he had first seen me, the place that was now the origin point of his obsession, but the vast, impersonal downtown branch. I found a secluded carrel on the third floor, a small, sterile desk surrounded by shelves of books on subjects I knew nothing about. It was a haven of neutrality. I sat there for hours, the hum of the library's ventilation system a steady, monotonous drone. My mind was a courtroom, and I was re-examining the evidence of my life, piece by painful piece. But this time, I wasn't just looking at the grand romantic gestures. I was looking at the smaller, more insidious moments. I thought about our arguments. They were rare, but when they happened, he was always preternaturally calm, impossibly patient. He always knew the exact right thing to say to diffuse my anger, to validate my feelings, to make me feel heard. I had thought it was a sign of his emotional intelligence, his deep empathy. Now I saw it for what it was. A strategy. He wasn't navigating my emotions, he was deploying pre-researched tactics. He knew my triggers, my weak spots, my deepest insecurities, and he used that knowledge, not to win the fight, but to manage me, his volatile subject. I thought about the friends I had lost over the years. My college best friend Amy, who had found Mark a little too perfect, a little creepy. I had defended him fiercely, and our friendship had withered under the strain. He had never told me to stop being friends with her, but he had subtly, expertly, sown seeds of doubt. "I just worry she doesn't respect our relationship," he would say, his voice full of gentle concern. He hadn't just studied me, he had curated my life, subtly isolating me from anyone who might question the perfection of his narrative. This was the most terrifying realization of all. The deception wasn't just in the past, it wasn't a lie that had ended the day we met. It was an active, ongoing, daily process of manipulation. His attentiveness was a form of control. His thoughtfulness was a means of shaping my reality. He hadn't just engineered a meeting, he had engineered a marriage. He had engineered me. Who was I outside of his influence? I had defined myself for a decade through the lens of his love. I'm the woman who is loved perfectly by Mark. That was my identity. But if that love was a lie, a performance based on a script I had unknowingly written, then who was I? The librarian announced that the library was closing in 15 minutes. I had been there for 6 hours. My phone showed a dozen missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic text from him. "Please come home. I'm so sorry for whatever I did. I can't live without you." The last message sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't a plea, it was a threat. It was the desperate cry of a creator who was about to lose control of his creation. I knew I couldn't go home. Not back to that house, that stage. But I couldn't run forever. I had to confront him. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed an ally, someone who could see him not as the perfect husband, but as a subject. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over one name. It was a long shot. We hadn't spoken in years, but she was the one person who had seen the cracks in his perfect facade from the very beginning. I took a deep breath, and I called Amy. When she answered, her voice a mix of surprise and caution, I didn't waste any time on pleasantries. "Amy," I said, my voice shaking, "you were right about Mark. You were right about everything, and I need your help." Amy didn't hesitate. There was no "I told you so," no recrimination for the years of silence. There was only the steady, grounding voice of the friend I had foolishly cast aside. "Where are you?" she asked. "I'm on my way." An hour later, we were sitting in a quiet 24-hour diner, a brightly lit island in the dark city. The smell of coffee and grease felt blessedly real, a stark contrast to the artificial perfection of my life. I told her everything. I started with the psychiatric report, the words spilling out of me in a frantic, jumbled torrent. I told her about the 2 years of surveillance, the engineered meeting, the decade of calculated thoughtfulness. As I spoke, I watched her face. She wasn't shocked. There was anger in her eyes, a fierce protective anger on my behalf, but there was no surprise. It was the sad, weary expression of someone whose worst suspicions were finally being confirmed. "I knew it," she said, when I finally finished, her voice a low, furious hum. "I knew there was something wrong, Sarah. Nobody is that perfect. It's not human." It always felt like he was playing a part, like he had read the script and you hadn't. I just never imagined the script was this monstrous. Her validation was a balm on a wound I hadn't known was still raw. The years I had spent defending him, convincing myself that Amy was just jealous or cynical, that shame dissolved in the face of her unwavering belief. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice small. "I can't go back there, but I can't just disappear. He's not stable, Amy. That report wasn't just about a creepy crush. It used words like pathological, fixation. He won't just let me go." "No," she said, her expression hardening. "He won't. A man who spends 2 years building the perfect cage isn't going to just open the door when the bird decides it wants to fly away. We need a plan." We spent the next 2 hours in that diner booth, a 2-woman war council. My initial instinct was to run, to pack a bag and move to a different state, to change my name and disappear. But Amy, with her clear, pragmatic mind, dismantled that idea. "You can't run," she said. "He's an expert at finding you. It's his defining skill. Running is what he expects. It's part of his story, the tragic, misunderstood lover whose fragile partner has fled. We can't play a part in his story anymore. We have to blow it up." Her plan was terrifying in its directness. It was a plan of confrontation, but not on his terms. "We need to get the report," she said. "That's the weapon. Without it, it's just your word against the word of the perfect, adoring husband. We need the physical proof of his pathology." The thought of going back to that house, to the closet where the report was hidden, made my blood run cold. But I knew she was right. "How?" I whispered. "He's there. He'll be waiting." "We create a distraction," she said, a strategic glint in her eye. "He's obsessed with your emotional state. He's a scientist, and you're his experiment. So we give him new data to analyze. You're going to call him. You're going to agree to meet him, but not at the house. Somewhere public, a park, a coffee shop. You tell him you need to talk, that you're confused and scared. You keep him there, talking, analyzing your every word for as long as you can. While you're doing that, I'm going to go to the house." "He'll never let you in," I said. "He won't have to," Amy replied, a grim smile on her face. "I still have the spare key you gave me 8 years ago. I never gave it back. I always had a feeling that someday you might need me to." The plan was a high-wire act, a desperate gamble, but it was the only thing that felt proactive. The only thing that felt like fighting back instead of running. It was a plan to steal the truth back from the man who had stolen my life. We left the diner and went back to her apartment. It was a small, messy, wonderful space, filled with books and half-finished art projects. It was a life in progress, not a curated performance. It was real. I sat on her sofa, my heart pounding, my phone in my hand. It was time to call the monster and invite him to tea. I pressed his number. He answered on the first ring. Sarah? His voice was a cocktail of desperation and relief. Oh my God, Sarah, are you okay? Where are you? I took a deep breath, channeling a version of myself that was confused, fragile, but willing to talk. Mark, I said, my voice trembling just enough. I'm okay. I'm sorry I ran. I was just so scared. I think we need to talk. The phone call was the most difficult performance of my life. I had to play the part of the confused, overwrought wife, a role he had, in essence, been training me for a decade. Every word was a lie, every tremor in my voice a calculated effect. And he, the master student of my psyche, believed every second of it. His relief was palpable, a tangible thing I could feel through the phone. He had feared his subject was breaking, escaping the experiment. My call was a sign that the specimen was ready to be placed back under the microscope. We agreed to meet at a small, neutral cafe halfway between the library and our house. I chose it specifically for its large plate glass windows and its single open room. It was a place with no dark corners to hide in. I told him I would be there in an hour. I'll be waiting, he said, his voice thick with a counterfeit emotion I could no longer decipher. Was it love? Or was it the thrill of a researcher about to analyze a fascinating new data set? I love you, Sarah. We can fix this. I know, I lied, and hung up the phone. Amy and I synchronized our watches like spies in a cheap movie. The absurdity of it would have been comical if it weren't so terrifying. I gave her the address, the location of the closet, the description of the box. Be careful, I whispered as she prepared to leave her apartment. He's not the threat right now, she said, her expression grim as she pocketed the old familiar key to my house. He's focused on you. He's a predator that only has eyes for one prey. Just keep him talking and don't believe a word he says. Walking into that cafe was like walking onto a stage. He was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. He looked haggard, his perfect, thoughtful facade showing the first signs of cracking under the strain of losing control. He stood up the moment he saw me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading intensity. Sarah! He breathed as I sat down opposite him. Mark? I said, my voice quiet. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in his specific brand of psychological manipulation. He didn't ask about the report. He didn't ask what I had found. He made it all about me. He was the calm, rational partner dealing with his wife's sudden, inexplicable emotional breakdown. I know you've been under a lot of stress at work, he began, his voice a low, soothing murmur. And I think I haven't been paying enough attention. I've been so wrapped up in my own world. This is my fault. I should have seen how unhappy you were. He was reframing the narrative, casting himself as the neglectful but ultimately loving husband, and me as the fragile, stressed-out wife. He was handing me a plausible, comfortable lie to explain my behavior. All I had to do was take it. A year ago, I would have melted under his empathy, apologized for scaring him, and the cage door would have clicked shut behind me once more. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I just needed to keep him talking. It's not just work, I said, feeding him a line, giving him a new thread to follow. Of course it's not, he said, leaning forward, his eyes full of a counterfeit compassion. Tell me everything. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. While he spoke, my phone, sitting face down on the table, vibrated. A text from Amy. I had set a specific vibration pattern for her, one I would recognize. It was our signal. One short buzz, I'm at the house. 2 short buzzes, I'm inside. 1 long buzz, I have it, I'm out. This was 1 short buzz. She was there. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to keep his focus entirely on me. I started talking. I talked about anything and everything, a stream of consciousness designed to keep him engaged. I talked about my job, my childhood, a dream I'd had the other night. I was Scheherazade, telling stories to save my own life. And he, the psychologist, the researcher, listened with rapt attention, nodding, analyzing, offering gentle, insightful comments. He was so engrossed in the study of me that he was completely oblivious to the real world outside the cafe's windows. My phone buzzed again. 2 short buzzes. Amy was inside the house. Inside his fortress. My fortress. I felt a surge of adrenaline. And sometimes I just feel like I'm not the person I was supposed to be, I said, pulling a vague existential crisis out of thin air. Who were you supposed to be? He asked, his voice soft, his gaze intense. He was leaning so far forward his face was just inches from mine. The predator was studying his prey up close, mesmerized. My phone let out 1 long, sustained buzz. She had it. She was out. The weapon was secured. The cage was empty. My job was done. The performance was over. I stopped talking. I leaned back in my chair, the frantic, nervous energy draining away, replaced by a calm, cold clarity. Mark frowned, sensing the shift. What is it? I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without the filter of love or fear. I saw a profoundly broken, obsessive man who had built a perfect, beautiful prison around me because he was too afraid to live in the real world. It's over, Mark, I said, my voice devoid of the fake emotion I had been using for the last hour. It was my real voice, and it sounded strong. What's over? He asked, a flicker of genuine confusion, of real panic in his eyes. He knew he had lost control of the conversation. The study, I said. The experiment is over, and the subject is leaving the lab. I stood up, leaving my untouched tea on the table. I didn't wait for his reply. I didn't look back at his shocked, uncomprehending face. I walked out of the cafe and into the bright afternoon sun. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't following a script. I was walking into a life that was finally, terrifyingly, my own. Freedom was not a single triumphant moment. It was a series of small, disorienting steps. I walked away from the cafe and didn't look back, but the feeling of being watched, of being a subject under observation, lingered like a phantom limb. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every stranger's glance felt like surveillance. Mark had conditioned me to be the center of a one-man universe, and escaping that orbit felt like being cast into a cold, dark void. I met Amy at a park a few miles away. She was sitting on a bench, a plain canvas tote bag resting beside her. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mixture of relief and grim victory. She didn't say a word, just patted the space on the bench next to her. I sat down, and she pushed the tote bag toward me. It was right where you said it would be, she said, her voice low. At the bottom of a box, like a dirty secret. I was in and out in less than 10 minutes. I looked at the bag. Inside was the manila envelope, the 30 pages of clinical text that had systematically deconstructed my life and my marriage. It was just a stack of paper, but it felt as heavy and as dangerous as a loaded gun. It was the truth. It was my weapon, and I had no idea how to use it. He called me, Amy said, pulling out her phone, twice after you left the cafe. He sounded unhinged, kept asking where you were, what I had done. He knows I was there. He knows we have it, I whispered, a fresh wave of fear washing over me. The predator knew he had been outsmarted, and that would make him more dangerous, not less. Good, Amy said, her voice hard. Let him be scared. It's his turn. We spent the rest of the afternoon in that park, a sanctuary of green in the concrete city, and we planned our next move. My initial primal instinct was to take the report and run, to go to a state he'd never find and build a new life under a new name. But Amy, my clear-eyed general, argued against it. "This can't be your story, Sarah," she said, her voice firm. "You can't spend the rest of your life as a fugitive from a man who is, essentially, a ghost. You have to expose him. You have to take control of the narrative publicly. Otherwise, he'll always be out there, and he'll be writing your ending for you. He'll be the heartbroken, perfect husband whose fragile wife had a breakdown and vanished. You can't let him win the story." She was right. Running would be a life sentence of looking over my shoulder. Confrontation, as terrifying as it was the only path to true freedom. The plan we devised was not about revenge. It was about liberation. It was about creating a wall of truth so high and so strong that he would never be able to touch me again. The first step was legal. The next morning, I was in the office of a high-powered divorce attorney Amy had found, a woman who specialized in cases involving psychological abuse and manipulation. I sat across from her gleaming mahogany desk and told my story for the third time. I pushed the psychiatric report across the desk. The lawyer, a woman with a reputation for being unflappable, read the first few pages, and her jaw tightened. "In 25 years of practice," she said, her voice a low, controlled fury, "I have never seen anything like this. This isn't just grounds for divorce. This is psychological warfare." She filed for an emergency restraining order that same day. The petition included the entire unredacted psychiatric report as an exhibit. It was the first official public detonation of the truth. The order was granted, a legal shield that, for the first time in 12 years, made it illegal for Mark to study me. The second step was logistical. With Amy's help, I began the process of untangling my life from his. We closed our joint bank accounts. We packed up my essential belongings from the house, a process that felt like an archaeological dig through a fraudulent civilization. Every object, every piece of furniture was a prop from his play, and I took only what was truly mine. But the final, most crucial step was personal. It was about reclaiming my own mind. He had spent a decade as the expert on me. He knew my preferences, my fears, my dreams, because he studied them like a textbook. Now I had to become the expert on myself again. I started small. I went to a coffee shop and ordered a chai latte, something he knew I disliked. I listened to new music, went to movies he would have hated, took long, aimless walks through neighborhoods he would have found uninteresting. Each choice was a small act of rebellion, a declaration of independence. I was actively trying to become a person he wouldn't recognize, a woman whose data was no longer valid. I was corrupting his research, making his life's work obsolete. I was slowly, painstakingly killing the character he had written, and for the first time, I was getting to know the real me. The restraining order was a piece of paper, but it felt like a force field. For the first time in my adult life, I was legally protected from Mark's observation. It was a strange, disorienting, and exhilarating feeling. The order stipulated that he could not contact me, come within 500 feet of my new and unpublished address, or attempt to monitor me in any way. The subject was no longer available for study. Mark, predictably, did not react well to having his experiment shut down. According to my lawyer, his legal team fought the restraining order with a ferocious, desperate energy. They painted me as an unstable, vindictive woman, and him as the baffled, heartbroken husband. They tried to have the psychiatric report sealed, claiming it was a violation of his privacy. They used every legal maneuver in the book to try and maintain control of the narrative, but the report was too damning. The cold, clinical language of the psychiatrist documenting his pathological obsession in his own words was irrefutable. Every motion they filed was denied. The restraining order was upheld. The truth was now a matter of public record. This legal battle was a strange, remote war, fought by lawyers in courtrooms I never entered. My own battle was quieter, more internal. I was living in a small, sparsely furnished apartment on the other side of the city, a place that held no memories of him. Amy had helped me move in, and for the first few weeks, she was my constant shadow, a protective, grounding presence. The process of rebuilding my identity was slow and painful. It was like recovering from a long illness. The muscles of my own decision-making had atrophied. For a decade, my life had been a series of perfect moments curated by Mark. Now, I was faced with the terrifying, liberating reality of a life without a curator. What did I want for dinner? What movie did I want to see? What did I think about the news? I had to get to know myself as if I were a stranger. Some days were harder than others. I would find myself humming a song and realize it was a song he had introduced me to. I would crave a certain type of food and have to wonder if it was a genuine preference or a conditioned response. His programming ran deep. He had not just been my husband, he had been the operating system of my life, and I was now trying to reboot myself with a new, unfamiliar software. But paranoia lingered. I would see a man in a crowd who looked vaguely like him, and my heart would seize. I would get a wrong number phone call and be convinced it was him, checking to see if my number was still active. I had to consciously fight the feeling of being watched, a feeling that had been my reality for 12 years, 2 of which I had been unaware of. The turning point came about 2 months after I had left him. I was in a bookstore, a different bookstore, one with bright lights and the smell of new paper, and I was browsing the fiction section. I picked up a book by an author I had never heard of. I read the first page, and it was okay. Just okay. I didn't love it, and I put it back on the shelf. It was a small, insignificant act, but it felt monumental. For my entire life with Mark, my tastes had been validated, celebrated. He had mirrored my own preferences back to me so perfectly that I had come to see them as a sign of my own good taste. The idea that I could like something that was just okay, that my preferences didn't have to be part of some grand, faded, romantic narrative, was a revelation. It was okay to just be a person with messy, inconsistent, and sometimes mediocre tastes. I started to find joy in the mundane, in the uncurated. I bought a hideous, brightly colored mug that I knew he would have hated. I painted my living room a shade of yellow that was cheerful and unapologetic. I spent a whole weekend binge-watching a terrible reality TV show. Each of these small, imperfect choices was a brick in the foundation of my new, authentic self. My lawyer called me one afternoon. "It's done," she said. "He's agreed to all our terms. The divorce is final." There was no court appearance, no final confrontation. He had finally, reluctantly conceded defeat. He had signed the papers that legally severed his connection to me. The document stipulated that he would have no contact with me, ever. Our assets were divided, our shared life legally dissolved. The experiment was officially, unequivocally over. The cage was gone. The creator had abandoned his creation. And for the first time, I felt the terrifying, exhilarating, and absolute silence of true, unobserved freedom. I was just Sarah, and I was finally ready to find out who that was. It's been a year since the divorce. A year of quiet, deliberate, and sometimes clumsy self-discovery. The silence that once felt like a void has become a comfortable, welcome space. I have filled it not with a grand epic romance, but with the small, authentic details of a life lived on my own terms. I have a new job, a new circle of friends, a new favorite coffee shop where the barista knows my name, not because she was programmed to, but because I've been there enough times for her to learn it. I have come to understand that Mark was a ghost. Not the scary, malevolent kind, but the sad, hollow kind. He was a man so empty of his own identity that he had to steal mine. His obsession wasn't about love, it was about a desperate, pathological need to find a blueprint for how to be human. He saw in me a life that was vibrant and real, and he tried to possess it, to replicate it, because he had no idea how to build one of his own. I was not his victim in the way I first thought. I was his unwilling teacher. And the final, most important lesson I taught him was that a real life cannot be studied. It must be lived. The last I heard, through the sterile filter of our lawyers, was that he had sold the house, our house, his stage, and moved to a different country. His lawyer said he was seeking treatment. I don't know if that's true, or if it's just the final line in the story of the misunderstood, tragic man he always wanted to be. I find, to my surprise, that I don't care. His story is no longer my concern. Amy and I are closer than ever. Our friendship, rebuilt on a foundation of hard-won truth, is one of the most real things in my life. We laugh about it sometimes in a dark, wry way. We call it the great demarking. The process of finding and erasing all the subtle, insidious ways he had shaped my life. I still think about the bookstore sometimes. Not the meet-cute, the engineered moment that started it all, but the idea of it. The idea that two people could, against all odds, reach for the same story at the same time. I haven't been on a single date this past year. I'm not ready for that, but I haven't given up on the idea of love. I've just redefined it. Love, I've learned, is not about finding someone who knows you perfectly. It's not about a seamless, frictionless union of two souls. Real love is about the messy, awkward, and beautiful process of getting to know someone with all their imperfections and inconsistencies. It's about the arguments you don't know how to win, the surprises that catch you off guard, the joy of discovering a new favorite song together. It's about writing the story together, day by day, not showing up on the first page with the entire manuscript already finished. My life is no longer a perfect, curated masterpiece. It is a messy, unpredictable, and sometimes difficult work in progress. It is a story full of plot holes and questionable character choices, but it is mine. Every word, every comma, every messy, beautiful, uncurated page is mine. And it leaves me with a final question, a question for anyone who has ever been in love, or thought they were. My ex-husband built a perfect, flawless love story on a foundation of complete deception. I now have an imperfect, messy life built on a foundation of absolute truth. So I have to ask, which one is the real romance? Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new stories every day.